There we go. Thanks.
Hi,
So, and I might, if I mute you,
Conference.
just unmute yourself when you get a chance, okay?
Sure.
So we've been looking at racial injustice a lot, but I wanted to also talk about wealth, which also speaks to racial injustice, but there's definitely a narrative about wealth here in America that I don't think we've paid enough attention to. So first of all, I wanted to start with the Homestead Act. So this begins in 1862. It's in many ways a product of the Civil War, because the Southern Democrats had gone home and the Northern Republicans were now free to kind of pass what they wanted. And so the reason why this is kind of a Northern law is they were trying to increase the Northern type of land ownership, which is small landowners, versus the Southern type of land ownership, which were plantations. But plantations, of course, necessitate the owning of slaves to work them for them to be as profitable. Okay. All of this, the subtext here, of course, is that this is Native American land, which had been acquired through treaty-ish. And there's a whole horrible sordid history of that, but I don't want to go into that today, but just understand that that is the assumption behind all of this. 1.6 million grants of 270 million acres, but only about 80 million of those acres went to small farmers. So like in my family, I know some of my ancestors homesteaded, and so they would have been in that small farmer, but a lot of it went to land speculators, larger estates, people who kind of, so this is happening during the Civil War, so there isn't actually a lot of policing of it. And so there's a lot of kind of abuse of the system, which seems to happen a lot in America.
Yes.
Right. And that 270 million acres is roughly equivalent to most of the Midwest. So these are the states and the millions of acres per state. And so here's a map. So think of, this is how much the Homestead Act gave away. And I mean, all of it. And of course, it wasn't just in the Midwest, it was everywhere. There's this horrible Tom Cruise movie called Far and Away, where I think he's a homesteader in Oklahoma-ish, something like that. So that's pretty sobering. If you've ever spent a few hours, like driving from Fargo to Frisco, for example, or Lincoln or someplace, think about all of that land that was given away during the Homestead Act. Now, the Homestead Act wasn't the first act like this, and it wasn't the last either. There were actually over 500 million acres given away through the various laws that gave land to people. So like later on, as people started to have taken the land suitable for crops, and they got more into like Western North Dakota, where it's cattle crop, it's livestock, they started to double and even quadruple the amount of land that was given away to 320 and 640. I mean, it's a whole square mile because it takes so much more land to sustain cattle. Bottom line, 20% of the US is given away in Homestead Act type laws. If that makes sense. It's just kind of crazy. Do you have a question, Judy? Oh, here. Wait, you have to unmute yourself. Yep, Judy, I'll go. There we go.
So I have heard NDSU referred to as a land grant.
It is.
Research facility. So did that happen at the same time?
Yes.
Not necessarily. What it means is that they were the land. I'm sorry. Okay. Good news. We had a staff member who maybe had been exposed to COVID who tested negative. So it means that the state gave them the land, so it's not a private college typically, or private university. But and Nancy, maybe you know more about this, but that was my understanding, is that because the University of Minnesota is a land grant university, meaning that they're kind of tied to the state.
Yeah, that's right.
they can't become private, or maybe you can become private, but
No.
I'm not exactly sure how that works, but I don't think you can.
Okay. Okay,
But that's an important point though, Judy Hago, you know, for those of us who go to NDSU and who, you know, we paid our tuition to get that education. I think we might forget that some of that tuition is subsidized by the fact that NDSU got the land for free from the state government, probably doesn't pay taxes on it, is my guess.
They
Et cetera,
don't.
et cetera. Yep.
Yep.
So. Okay. And this point we already kind of made. I just hadn't gone back to tidy that up. But yeah, much of the land went to larger estates and speculators is kind of the dirty little secret. Here is the photo of the Bakken family from Norway, which was taken near Milton, North Dakota. And I think it's taken by a photographer named Hallstrand, who was arguably the most famous photographer from North Dakota. That's what I've heard, what I read. But I couldn't, I dug down in there and I couldn't figure out if he took this or if he had acquired it through someone who taught him. So, but this photo is the basis for the Homestead Act commemorative stamp, which some of you might remember.
No.
I'm not calling you old. I'm just saying maybe
Yeah.
you remember this.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for my dad to, I've used those all the time on my butt. No, just kidding. So
Well, to be honest, those 4-cent stamps went out was
you got to turn the laptop down. We can't hear you when you're talking.
okay. The 4-cent stamp went out when I was in high school, and they raised it to a nickel, and we thought that was outrageous.
Yep. The 1860s, right, Dad?
Yes.
So let's get to the value of this gift. And I put gift in quotes because it's like stolen goods, right? So,
Mhm.
right, we're all receivers of stolen goods in a way. Gift of land. Each family typically received 160 acres and they had to live on it for 5 years and pay a small fee.
Mhm.
Quick note, more than one person mentioned that there is a long history of women homesteading by themselves. And there's actually a book out there about it, about women who homesteaded by themselves, which I had not heard of. Fascinating. But back to this idea of this value, because think about it, these are I'm going to argue that these are all European descent families who are getting these pieces of land. That's my best guess. I don't have proof of that. That's just my assumption. And if you take that 160 acres and use an average of $4,000 an acre, you'd have a current value of approximately $650,000. I know that price would be high for some areas in North Dakota. It would be maybe a little low for some areas in North Dakota. For Minnesota, again, I mean, like down where I live, where I grew up, I should say, that would be a little low. That'd be that'd be a pretty good price for land, I think, down there. So think about that. Your ancestors, if they were able to participate and benefit from the Homestead Act, they got an influx in today's dollars of roughly $650,000 into that family.
Wow.
Yep, pretty sobering to me, at least.
Yeah.
Because, oh, sorry, go ahead, Judy, Mom.
No, I just said, wow.
So if you put that $650,000 and you compare it to wealth in America these days, any idea where that would put us in terms of like 1 to 100? Like how high on the wealth scale do you think we get with 650,000?
I don't know.
Top 20%.
Oh.
Yep. If you had $650,000 in assets through real estate, you know, stocks, bonds, you know, money in the bank, puts you in the top 20%.
Wow.
So current wealth, So where does that 650 rank us with kind of the average wealth of people in America? Well, the average white family has $184,000 in wealth. So 3 times plus, 3.5 times plus, the average white person's, average white family's wealth. Hispanic families, by contrast, have $38,000 in wealth. Any guess where African-American families are?
Okay,
6,000.
23,000.
3,000. Wow.
And now for us who live in the Midwest, here's the really egregious one. Native American families haven't had their wealth
Ugh.
measured since 2000. And at the time, their wealth was 5,700. White
Jeez.
families at that time had a little over 150.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's pretty sobering. I hope you, this is not a cheery exercise, unfortunately.
No.
Here's a graph of just white families and black families, just to give you an idea over the last 20, 30 years, what it looks like.
So Pastor Eric,
Mhm.
are these figures taken from the 10-year census that's always taken every 10 years, or where are the figures, where do they come from?
That's a great question, Judy. I got them from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, which is at
Mm.
the very bottom of this slide.
Okay,
And I can put the link out for that as well, and they can explain their methodology. Because I've seen there were a couple different methodologies that were used. So, but you end up with roughly the same kind of understanding, even if the methodologies aren't necessarily always the same.
Mhm.
So, interesting point though, the Federal Reserve banks are actually, you're going to find a lot of this research being done by economists who work at the Federal Reserve banks.
Mhm.
So,
The
which to
sad
me,
part of this, Eric.
Oh, yep.
The sad part that strikes me here, to go actually coming from the slide that we just saw, and we see the black family right there.
Yep.
Native American families would be way below that graph as far as current wealth.
Yeah.
Even
And
though
that's,
it hasn't been measured, we know how little they are able to earn.
Right.
Or own.
and that's actually one of the problems. I wanted to include Native Americans kind of in the narrative here, but there's just not reliable data out there. It's pretty bad when they don't even bother to measure,
Mhm.
right? I mean, like, talk about matter. Do I matter in America?
Mhm.
No, we don't even bother to measure you. So,
oh,
or maybe, and that in there to, and the sociologist defense or economist defense, it might be very difficult to measure them. That's possible.
Oh, of course, they aren't
Yep.
even allowed to have addresses, so.
They are a lot. Yeah, it's just hard. Yep. But back in 1989, look at black families were down at 9,000 as well.
Mhm.
So yeah, and then that's when white families were at 143. I mean, it's pretty amazing. And here's kind of, I think, where to me, I find some cognitive dissonance. There's a little, one might say, irony, where it just doesn't make sense. So we have this sort of idea, especially in the Midwest, I think, that if you work hard, right? That's, we're told that if just work hard, right? And the American dream, and this is a quote from a guy in 1931, says that it's the dream of a social order in which each man and each woman shall be able to attain the fullest stature of which they are innately capable, and be recognized by others for what they are, regardless of the fortuitous circumstances of birth or position. So this individual is writing in 1931 and being careful enough to distinguish the genders in his writing, which is remarkable, and basically making this very clear that the American dream is about equal opportunity. Right?
Mhm.
But I think we've turned it into an ethic that states if you work hard, you will get ahead, which is very
Mhm.
different.
Yep.
So I've joked about distinguishing between, you might know people in your life who can't be wrong, and then you might know other people in your life who have to be right.
Mhm.
They're very different people. Can't be wrong, have to be right. Same thing with this. Equal opportunity versus if you work hard, you will get ahead. I think those are very different things.
Mhm.
So here's a definition I pulled off the web, and I'll read this because it might be hard for some of us to read. The American dream is a sort of ethos or set of beliefs that drive many US citizens as they work toward creating a life for themselves. This set of ideals, which includes notion, and listen to these words in terms of our current political climate, notions of individual rights, freedom, democracy, and equality, is arguably centered around the belief that each individual has the right and freedom to seek prosperity and happiness, regardless of where or into what circumstances they were born. And then here's the key thing. A key element of the American dream is the belief that through hard work and perseverance, anyone can rise from rags to riches, becoming financially successful and socially upwardly mobile.
I'll bet that was written by a white person.
Yeah, I think you might be right, Woody.
You win that bet.
Yep. And that's kind of the problem. Because I think the deck is stacked against some or many. So I have weekly median wages up here. And if you look at this, white men make $1,108 weekly median wage. This is a couple years back. White women, $200 less at $912. My wife reminded me a week or so ago that she finally caught up to her male counterparts
Mhm.
because it takes until March to catch up if you're a woman.
Right, yeah.
Black men, $810, so almost $300 less than the white men. Black women even less at $775.
No
And then Hispanic
Yeah.
men, $769.
measure of it. They don't
Yep.
pay income taxes.
Yep. I'm going to
They don't
mute you
have
guys
to.
for a second. Hispanic men, $769, and Hispanic women at $706. So Hispanic women are $400 less than white men in terms of weekly median wage. Questions or comments about that? Or
It really makes me struggle when I think of how easy it is if I just associate with white people. And if I'm not really reaching out to indigenous or blacks or Hispanics or LGBTQ people.
Yep.
Easy for me to isolate myself and just stay in that same rut.
yeah, and thanks for saying that, Elwood, because I'm not able to include all of the different categories that should be included in this slide because we don't keep track of how LGBTQ folks
Mhm.
fare, but they are discriminated against. And my guess is that they would not be equal to their same gendered, same race counterparts.
Right.
So, remember, these are averages. So we'll have the exceptions that prove the rule, but on average.
And
And then
to take up one more thing of Elwood's point, I just want to say, and if you wanted to hang out with a Hispanic man or Hispanic women and get to know them a little bit, it's difficult to do that because they are actually working 2 or 3 jobs to get to that level of income, so that not only is it difficult for us to know them unless they're our barista or something and we see them every morning at 9:15, but it's hard to be together with them because they have no time.
Yeah, I'm talking about time. I am a retired person who has, quote, all kinds of time and can choose and so forth.
Yeah,
But it's not dependent upon the fact that I am there and working those 2 or 3 jobs.
that's right.
Mhm.
Thank you, Pat.
And then it's not just wages though. Here is pension and healthcare. So pension is the left side. So you'll see there are 4 graphs. The left graph and then the graph below it are pensions. So on average, notice first of all how pensions have declined in America. We're down to 39% of folks get pensions.
Yeah,
Then you break that up by race and ethnicity, and notice we have 44% of white people get pensions, 36% of black people get pensions, and only 28% of Hispanic people get pensions. So they can never retire
Mm-mm.
unless they're going to count on
Oh.
Social Security.
Yeah.
The right side of the graph is, or the right 2 graphs are healthcare. So notice men get healthcare at a much higher rate than women do. 6% more for men for healthcare. And then by race, white people get healthcare at 60%, black people at 55%, and Hispanic people at 46%.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, so going back to, like, let's go back to the Homestead Act and the land that we, stole from the Native Americans fair and square, right? You take that wealth and you give it to white families, and then that kind of filters down through the generations. And then on top of it, you set up the structure so that white people get benefits and brown and black people don't.
Yeah.
And women don't get benefits. So, it's just the whole system is kind of stacked. And then the pension thing is important because that helps you then be able to divert some of your wealth into helping your kids afford college, because
Yes.
you have your pension to count on, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Also, I might add that receiving a pension really hangs on to the fact if you can hang on to your job where they are providing the pension. And I would imagine Black people and Hispanics probably have a harder time holding down that one job through their whole lifetime.
Yes.
That's why as we've drawn our social services back and back and back and back and back, it's this huge irony, because my family received that big gift and as immigrants, and so now you have new immigrants coming, and we're not giving them near the same gift.
Yeah.
And then, boy, it goes from good to better, right? We talked about federal minimum wage. So last time they did the minimum wage was in 2009, and it's $7.25. So you can kind of see where it started in 38. It winds through the years. But here's the problem with that. Here's the federal minimum wage with inflation.
Yeah.
So the red line on the top is inflation adjusted. And notice up until about 1970, it has a pretty good upward slope, 30% upward slope, right? But then at 1970, I don't know what happens. And maybe some of you folks, I'm not calling you old, but you lived through the 70s. You might be able to help me understand, why does it go down? Because look at the slope. Now it's almost a 30% negative slope, downward slope to where we are today.
Well, there was an energy crisis in 73.
Yeah.
Could be a factor.
Yeah, that might be a big part of it.
And what about 2008, the economic depression?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to see here. I mean, that this graph isn't exceptionally, like precise. This is Bureau of Labor Statistics and Department of Labor. It's from 2018. Now, here's the other thing though. Household incomes have resumed growing following the Great Recession. So after 2008, right? Household incomes are back on the rise. So the minimum wage, so this, you have to imagine, so you stayed the same, right? In terms of your ability to earn a wage, that's the same as since 2009. And yet everybody else who's not making a minimum wage is making more money. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor there. So, you know, imagine minimum wage is going to go flat and everybody else in America is going like this. And that's 15%. Yeah, Ellen?
Yes, I would say that the powers of unions has decreased in the 70s particularly, and for sure in the 80s with Reagan.
Yep.
And that I'm sure had a lot to do with declining.
Yep. No, I think you're right. I think you're right.
Look at what has just happened in terms of Amazon and their vote down in Alabama.
Yep.
Rejecting it, but
Oh, they did. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Most,
And then Mom and Dad, I muted you guys. So if you do need to talk, you just have to unmute yourself. So, and then the next one, now I showed you how that income was going up, but notice it's actually just the rich that are going up. So here's 2008 right in here, right? Median income, which would be most of us, stays pretty much flat, goes up a little bit, but not really. That's because a lot of folks in that category lost real estate or lost housing, right? The 95th percentile certainly does that, but notice what they do afterwards. They go that really, I mean, it's almost 45-degree angle there. Whereas the median income folks, we're back to this 30-degree angle, but we're also much lower. Because like I said, back in 1970, and maybe it is the energy crisis, Jeannie, like you say, the 95th percentile just keeps going up at that same, you know, that same slope. And the median, so middle class families just kind of, you know, kind of plod along, not really getting anywhere. And 95th percentile, now watch this with the first percentile, the top 0.1%. Look where they go in comparison to everyone else. So here's 1980 way down on the bottom left, and they just go way, I mean, that's, they're going way, they have so much more wealth has been collected at the top.
Eric?
Yep.
I know you don't have a graph, but it would be interesting to see a graph of what inflation has done since 1950.
Hang on. Consumer price inflation. Ask and you
Okay.
shall receive.
Ah,
Again,
Thank
notice
you.
it starts in the 70s, like 1969, and then we get to 74 and notice that. So middle class families have this, you know, it's going up, but it's not going up as much. And yet consumer price inflation is a steeper curve. What that means is that our dollars are buying us less. My wages are going up, but I'm not able to buy as much.
And the cost of that inflation, or the dollar value of the dollar there, is going to the top wage earner, those in the $1 million categories.
Right. Right. Well, and those top wage earners, the top 1% or the top 0.01%, those folks are not feeling the effects of this. That's
No.
really that's really the issue. I mean, if someone has a job or is able to work within, play within the rules and makes lots of money and pays their taxes, great. You know, okay, that's wonderful. But what's frustrating for me is that the middle class and lower families seem to be kind of fighting a losing battle. And this is a political comment, so take it for what it's worth. I think that is the resentment that Trump and others are tapping into. Because the victimhood is a powerful morality clearing feeling. If you feel you are a victim, morality goes out the window. You can kill your brother Abel all day long. So.
What's so ironic about Trump is like he's maybe inspiring these feelings in people, but he's part of the top 0.1%. Like,
Well, at least that's what he says he is. We'll see what happens when we finally get his tax returns. But the other thing is Trump uses victimhood all the time. He's always, he often plays the victim. I don't want to say always, but he often plays the victim. The election was stolen from me, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
Poor
He's,
me.
yeah, poor me. He's the victim. So he's giving him the script, the narrative. He's saying, use victimhood. Then you don't have to care about reality, because if people stole the election, you can steal it right back, right? But back to our wealth conversation. So what does this all mean? Around 1970, everything seemed to change. Wealth in America. I think before 1970, you know, I'm not saying it was equitable, but it was a pretty stable wealth distribution. It was inequitable across racial lines, but you know, in terms of economy itself, it was pretty stable. As I say here, life became more expensive, but wages didn't keep pace. And the takeaway is, or one of the takeaways is, white families were better equipped to handle this changing situation because of their inherent wealth, typically from land or other assets gained from other populations, Native Americans and African Americans. Someone last night was saying that one of their relatives had taken some of the money that they were making off of Homestead Act land and paying for their nieces and nephews' college with it in the 70s.
Wow.
Right. So, but think about that. That is a way that white families then get richer, because if you do, I've left education levels out of this conversation, but if you bring that in, I mean, getting a college degree is on average the best way to increase your wage earning power over your lifetime. People who have college degrees make way more money than people without college degrees in general. So, and then the really crazy part for me is that white families who did that, their inherent wealth was typically from land or other assets gained from other populations. So if you're in the North, or you benefited from the Homestead Act, maybe in the West, it's land that was taken from the Native Americans. And if you're in the South, I mean, certainly that land was taken from the Native Americans, but then you had slaves who worked on it and then put all of that income ends up in the white families, not the black families, right? And then that income kind of rolls on through the generations. That's the thing. We can't forget that this wealth rolls through the generations. So my grandpa, Julian, went to college and graduated in like 1932. Is that right, Mom?
Yeah, close. Mm-hmm.
Something like that. So, I mean, that then builds wealth, right, in the family, number one. Number two, it also builds kind of some inertia for the family in terms of going to college, et cetera, et cetera. And that whole side of the family, I mean, became very successful. All of them went to college. There are buildings named after that side of the, you know, my mom's side of the family at Augsburg, for example, and stuff like that. I mean, it's just it kind of builds on itself, right? And my dad's side of the family, I mean, we were just recently emerged from the sod hut. No, I'm serious though. My grandma grew up in a sod house. Grandma Kay grew up in a sod house. So, but they were Homestead Act folks. So my dad and his cousins, et cetera, were able to go to college and became successful as well.
Was that sod hut in the Wilmer area?
Brookings
No,
County.
it actually was in Brookings County, South Dakota, which is and was only about 1 mile west of the Minnesota-South Dakota border.
Yep. And
1
my
mile
brother,
where?
1 mile west of the Minnesota-South Dakota border.
Oh,
And my brother actually still owns 40 acres of the original homestead.
The original homestead was only 40.
Oh, it was?
Oh,
okay.
There was no more land available in that area except several small plots of 40 acres and 20 acres because, well, it had been homesteaded and broken down, and it just there were no more quarter sections available.
Yep. And so what this means in terms of our lives today, in terms of wealth, right? What this means is that the United States is actually behind Poland on the Inequality Assisted Human Development Index. This is basically a fancy way of saying, if you look at standard of living, right, and you take into account access to healthcare, access to education, wage levels, and you account for inequality in a society, we're worse than Poland. And does anybody have a guess which country is number one?
Norway.
Yeah, of course.
Yes,
Constantly Norway. And unfortunately, we don't learn from them, even though we emigrated from there 150 years ago. One other piece to the puzzle is the poverty line. So if you go back to that federal minimum wage, $7.25 an hour, and you multiply that by 2,000 hours typically worked in a year, you get to 14,500. And that's just over the poverty line. But imagine if you were in a 3-person household, you have 2 people, they might make $29,000 a year full-time, right? Which, by the way, those jobs are hard to find because employers don't want to give full-time jobs away because then they have to pay health benefits. So you'll have 2 part-time jobs, and so then you have to commute between them, et cetera, et cetera. But the median income in America this year was 78,500. So poverty, I mean, think of that. Poverty line is about 4 times less than the median income. And then the other thing, and I don't have data about this up here, there is a big difference between poverty and then deep poverty. Deep poverty is less than half of what the poverty line is. So at 3-person household, it'd be less than, 10,006 or 805 or whatever it is. And there's a lot of the African-American families, Hispanic families who are in poverty are in deep poverty. Okay, so here I'm going to show you what that looks like. Here's the percentage of population in official poverty by race and ethnic origin. So white, non-Hispanic are 10% in poverty. Black alone is 26% in poverty. And that's what I was trying to, that's kind of misleading because 26% of Black folks are in poverty, but it's like 40% of that 26% are in deep poverty. But my PowerPoint was getting too much, and I'm like, people are just going to be, like, oh, there's so many graphs. So I get that, and we call it death by PowerPoint, which is actually usually just a lot of words, but in this case, it's a lot of graphs.
Yeah, and what actually is deep poverty?
It's less than half of the poverty line. So if you go back to this one, the poverty line for a 3-person household is 21,720. So deep poverty would be 10,810, or 55.
And then you think about how many single moms are trying to raise 2 or 3 children.
So those facts and figures are out there as well, Elwood. So there's a whole, this is just a massive topic, and I was trying to find these little points that would help us guide our way through, but that's out there too. They do it by, they show what it looks like once assistance is counted in. So welfare, support, SNAP, etc. They show what that does, etc. It makes a dent, but not really. But ever since Obamacare and a couple other things, there has been a big turnaround in the number of people in poverty. And I was a little frustrated, but I was kind of getting to the end and I ran out of time. This only goes through 2014, and it's gotten a little bit better since then, but that because of Obama's policies. I would imagine, I don't know what it's looked like during Trump's presidency.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you saw the little, my slide title here is Poverty Isn't Colorblind.
Yeah.
So bottom line, people of European descent experience poverty at a much lower level than many others in America. And because of our belief in the American dream, we tend to believe that wealth comes from hard work. I mean, if you work hard, you get wealthy, right? Try telling that to the people working 2 or 3 jobs, making 20 grand a year total, right? And so that's the irony, right? The American dream states that everyone should have a chance, but people of a certain genetic heritage have a distinct advantage in accumulating wealth. And I mean, in my extended family, it's almost a scandal if someone doesn't go to college or doesn't even try to go to college. I mean, think about that. You know, I'm like, it's like, oh, what, they didn't go to college? Well, they tried. Well, yeah, you know, and it's like, what's wrong with them? Right? It's just,
Yeah,
go ahead, Aaron.
I was just thinking of, so I'm from a really small town, and when I graduated from high school, we had one Hispanic person in my class, and at graduation, my mom was talking to his mom, and his mom was just crying, and she's like, I'm so proud of my son. He is the first one in our family to graduate from high school. So this was in 2011, and then I'm over there, like, it was never a question whether or not I was going to college. It was just like, which college am I going to, blah, blah, blah. And so it's eye-opening contrast.
Yep. And so then we assume that people in poverty are, what do you think?
Lazy.
That's the first one. Lazy. Yep. And we assume that they have chosen to be where they are, that this is their choice, right? And someone last night suggested that one more to add to this would be that they don't have the capabilities. They're not smart enough, that there's notice I say people that we have a certain genetic heritage that gives us an advantage. People think that that genetic heritage is the advantage, that just white people are just smarter or work harder or whatever what other myth you tell yourself to help you sleep at night. That's why we're where we are in society, but that's not it at all.
Let me just throw out something else. In yesterday's mail, I received from the Southern Poverty Law Center the year in hate and extremism, 2020. And it states
Are
29.
you trying to cheer us up, Woody?
Yes, right. 29% of Americans personally know someone who believes that white people are the superior race.
Wow.
Believe that.
Just throw that into the pot for what it's worth.
Wow.
I know
Yep.
many would say that.
9%.
Yep.
I know many that would say that.
Yeah, and those are the people who admit it. I think there's just a lot. I think there's just a lot of us who we don't even really think about it. You know, I've said this before. I did my grad work down in at LSTC, the Lutheran Seminary in Chicago, and it's on the south side of Chicago. It's right north of the University of Chicago. And more than once, I was walking to the grocery store, and there would be a group of black teenagers walking toward me, and I get scared. Why? I had never had a negative experience with a black teenager or with a black person ever, but yet my culture had taught me that I should be scared of them. So yeah.
Did that culture come from some of the curriculum that you studied while you were in high school?
Nah, more TV.
Or was it a California curriculum?
No, I'm guessing it's you know, TV, movies, books. If you wanna see how literature is racist, there's a Palestinian man named Edward Said who died a while back, who writes a book called Orientalism, where he suggests that all of Western literature is written from the Occidental, the Western perspective, orientated toward the Oriental, toward the West, toward the East. that you don't find literature written from the Eastern point of view.
Hmm.
I mean, in terms of Western literature, maybe within the last 10, 20 years you might, but you go, I mean, even if you know the book Heart of Darkness, which is a wonderful book in terms of opening up our eyes to some things, it's still written from his, you know, his point of view. So the main character's point of view, etc. So Edward Said, I have the book if you want to borrow it, because it's a snoozer, unless you're really interested in that. American system is stacked in European descent people's favor. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious. And now, but here's something that I found out that I hadn't really realized. We have this really long history of an elite class of the super rich, many of whom gained their wealth through ill-gotten means, like Stanford. So Leland Stanford, who founded Stanford University, we think, oh, prestigious, oh, Stanford, oh, fancy. Well, he got all the money by lying, cheating, and stealing from people. And that's how he got his money. So it'd be like, oh, so you know, if you're a Rhodes Scholar, Cecil Rhodes was actually a horrible racist. So it's like, I don't know if I really want that title. I don't know if they've thought about changing it ever, but yeah. Be like going to Hitler University in Germany. So yeah. But we don't acknowledge that. We don't say, listen, Stanford he was a stealer, he was a robber, he's a thief. We don't ever say. I mean, how many of you knew that Stanford was a big thief?
I did not.
I did.
Stephen Ambrose, by the way, has a good book on the railroad expansion, and that's part of where I learned that. So Stephen, he's the one who wrote Band of Brothers. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Stephen Ambrose.
Right.
Yep. So and this legacy, this sort of like this like always having this big group of people who are like at the very top, that legacy, along with the way we've kind of turned the American dream into this hard work equals wealth, we've created a segment of society that's not interested in a good society, but they're interested in climbing up the ladder to the top 1%.
In order to have better and bigger yachts.
Right, they have better and bigger yachts. Mike Williams on Sunday used he said it was Steinbeck. He wasn't sure, but he thought it was Steinbeck's quote that Americans always think of themselves as temporarily embarrassed millionaires.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we have friends too who also feel that people who are on welfare are going back to the lazy part, are on welfare because they're too lazy to work and go find a job.
Yeah. Well, don't confuse them with any facts and figures.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That's why I don't get invited to those parties anymore.
No,
So,
we don't talk about that anymore because I don't agree.
That's why you have the left wing and the right wing, because they are right.
that's right. So the last slide here, the takeaways. While the impulse exists elsewhere in human society to kind of be at that top level, for some reason America is infected with it like a disease. You know, Powerball, Mega Millions, the lottery, they have those in Europe, but they're not nearly as big a deal as they are here in America. For those who've lived in Europe, I mean, Aaron, do you remember Spain being obsessed with that as much? Not really.
No, I don't even remember mention of it there.
Yeah. And Spain's a pretty poor country. I mean, they're not some rich country that you could see where there might be a lot of people in Spain who are like, I can't wait to strike it rich, but it's just not a deal in Europe, etc. The other thing is that wealth disparity in America causes unknown societal effects and keeps America divided. We have no idea what we're doing to our community by not going to that first version of the American dream where everyone has equal access. I used to talk about this when I was at Augsburg. I would say that because we have put these boundaries and these limits on our society, our best president that we could have ever had, this is kind of in the maybe if we would have been smart enough to let everyone be president, our best president could have been an African-American slave from the 1860s, right? Like, but we'll never know because she could never have been elected president. Well, she probably couldn't get elected president now even. Because, I mean, look at the vitriol toward Kamala Harris for her non-white heritage.
2016.
Yeah, that's really what it's about. And then finally, the American dream is a myth. And there's notable exceptions that prove the rule, because bottom line, the vast majority of people basically stay in the same economic situation they were born into,
Mhm.
basically. So that was the last slide. Any slides people want me to go back to before I stop the PowerPoint?